Fantasy. What a genre. From dragons to unicorns to witches to fairies, whatever you think of, there's probably a book about it already. But in this video, I'll not be talking about George R. R. Martin, Patrick Rothfuss, Brandon Sanderson, Terry Pratchett, or any of the most popular fantasy authors that you've heard of and read already. In this video, I am bringing to you some of the most recent and some of my most beloved fantasy books that you should be reading in this year of 2023. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Rupkathabhattacharjeeofficial and you're watching my channel which is named after me because I lack creativity. In today's video, I'll be talking about some of the best fantasy books that you can be reading this year. This video is divided into three parts. The first one is about standalones, the second part is about duologies, and the third part is about trilogies. So you can skip around and watch whichever part you feel like in the description box below. And if you have read any of these novels, feel free to comment down below and discuss with me. So without any further ado, any introductions, etc., why don't we dig right in with our first book on this list, Juniper and Thorn by Eva Reid. Juniper and Thorn is a retelling of the Slavic folk tale, The Juniper Tree. The novel is set in the fictional world inspired by Russia called Oblia. Our main character, Marlichen, is the youngest of three, living under the tyrannical rule of her father, the last to visit in all of Oblia. A man cursed to never feel satisfied with anything. This man is a bottomless pit. He can devour an entire meal and still feel hungry. He can sleep for days and yet wake up and say that he's sleepy. Marlichen is striving for freedom. And when she gets a taste of it after her sisters cajole her into visiting the local ballet theater, there is nothing on her mind except for this freedom. Now, Juniper and Thorn is a book that subverts a lot of the traditional elements of fantasy and instead focuses on one character's internal development. Marlichen, by all accounts, is a passive narrator, but this passiveness is depicted in such a poignant and wonderful way that one is sitting at the edge of their seat, bated breath, waiting for where the story will go next. This is one of the novels which I will not recommend to everybody because of its dark content, and definitely check out the trigger warnings before reading it. But Juniper and Thorn's greatest highlight is its beautiful and poignant writing style. The writing is so immersive and atmospheric that it will make you forget that you're even reading a book. It plays out in front of your eyes, and the main character is so wonderfully written, so developed and three-dimensional that you will be rooting for her throughout this book. Now, there are a lot of diverse reviews of this book, while some people calling it a bad depiction of trauma and other people saying that it just didn't sit right with them. I say that those interpretations are most often made in bad faith, and I'll go as far as to say that the people just didn't really understand the point of this novel. This novel is obviously not for everybody, but if you are a person who enjoys rich world building with a lot of different kind of characters and don't mind dark elements in the novel, this is definitely the book that you should be reading right now. I also recommend The Wolf and the Woodsman by Eva Reid. So if you enjoy this one, definitely check that out as well. Those novels are not connected to each other in any way, and both are retellings of well-known and well-loved fairy tales. Moving on to the next book on this list. Now, if you are a vampire lover, most importantly, a lover of the novel Dracula by Bram Stoker, run, don't walk to read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. A Dowry of Blood is a retelling of the three wives of Dracula and the titular character himself, Dracula. This is one of those novels where the highlight is again the writing style and the atmosphere. Incredibly immersive, this book is written in epistolary format where the main character writes letters to her seemingly deceased husband. Now, this is not a who-done-it story, it's a why did they murder him story. One of the most immersive books that I have read. This is truly an epitome of what you would imagine when someone says gothic fantasy. This one and Juniper and Thorn are very complementary novels when you think about it. Both have a similar writing style, a similar narrative voice, and both are gothic horrors. Both of these novels embody the elements that you would find in Shirley M. Jackson's novel, The Haunting of Hill House, or We Have Always Lived in the Castle. Both of these novels are extreme good reads and I absolutely recommend them to you. And as I previously said, if you're a vampire lover, what are you waiting for? Go read this book. I think A Dowry of Blood will enamor anyone who starts reading it. It enamored me too, and I finished reading it in exactly one sitting, and I read it about 2 years ago, and it has still stuck with me. This is one novel that is ultimately unforgettable. Now again, this is another novel that is not made for everyone, but if you're not afraid to range out of your comfort zone and try new novels, especially ones that mix up elements of both horror and fantasy, you should definitely check this out. So let us move on to the next book on this video. And the last standalone, it is KKE by Vaishnavi Patel. KKE by Vaishnavi Patel is a book that has featured in another one of my videos, which is the best books that I read in the year of 2022, and it's linked in the description. So KKE by Vaishnavi Patel is a retelling of the Ramayana featuring the vilified stepmother Kaikeyi as the main character. This book adds more layers and dimensions to her character and subverts the trope of the vilified stepmother whose ambition and greed is her eventual downfall. Kaikeyi is afforded more nuance and development than she was in the original epic, and this book starts from her beginning as the princess of Kaikeya to her marriage to the king of Ayodhya and her subsequent downfall and vilification as the wicked stepmother. Now, this is one novel where the magic system is extremely unique. Now, the magic system in this book is Kaikeyi's ability to see people connected to each other with thin threads. She sees the bonds between people, and eventually she learns how to manipulate these bonds in doing her own bidding. Not only that, Kaikeyi's abilities as a warrior are expanded upon, and we see this flawed woman who by no accounts is perfect, and we see her journey to improve not only the life of herself but the women around her. I especially enjoy the relationships that Kaikeyi had with other women and how she worked to improve the lives of the common women. Writing style is something that you would expect in most fantasy novels, especially in adult fantasy, though it is immersive. Though the novel is slow paced, so if you're looking for something that is extremely fast paced, Kaikeyi probably wouldn't deliver on that front. But if you're looking for something that takes time to establish characters, that takes time to add depth to characters, especially their relationships and bonds with each other, with a unique and multi-dimensional magic system, Kaikeyi is the perfect book for you. Honestly, I cannot stress upon how imaginative the magic system in Kaikeyi is. And if you're aware of a novel with a similar magic system, most importantly something that has to do with human emotions and human bonds with each other, make sure to comment that book down below, because I need something akin to Kaikeyi to engross myself with. Moving on to the next book, now we have come to the duologies part of this video. Starting with one of my favorites, She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. She Who Became the Sun is again another retelling. Honestly, I could rename this video as a retelling rather than fantasy books. So She Who Became the Sun is a fantasy retelling of the founder of the Ming Dynasty, asking the question, what if the founder of the Ming Dynasty, Zhu Chongba, was actually a woman and not a man? This book starts off with our unnamed protagonist learning that her fate isn't one that people would want. She is fated to be forgotten, while her brother Zhu Chongba is fated to be a hero, to be remembered by all, to be never forgotten. But as the story progresses, we find that Zhu Chongba actually dies at a very young age. And when this unnamed protagonist, this person destined to be forgotten, steals her brother's destiny, claims his name Zhu Chongba as his own, we embark on this epic tale of how far a person would go to not be forgotten, how far a person would go to take their destiny into their own hands and leave their own mark on history. This is one of the novels which at first glance you'll brush off as something that will not really be your cup of tea. I did the same with it. I went into it with very little hopes because it was marketed as Mulan meets the Song of Achilles. Now, the Song of Achilles is not something that I enjoyed at all, and Mulan is obviously Disney, so I did go into this expecting quite a Disney-like storyline. Well, if your line of thinking is in any way similar to mine, you are absolutely wrong. There is nothing Disney about this book, and there is nothing Song of Achilles about this book. This book in its own right is a masterpiece. This not only has a very interesting narrative voice with an unreliable narrator, but also the characters are so compelling. This is a book that is for people who love characters more than they love the actual plot line or the storyline, or who could care less about the plot line itself when they can root for the characters. And Shu Chongba is one character that will make you root for her, but will also make you question your own morality and moral decisions. Shu Chongba is ready to go to any limits only if she can leave her own mark on history. And honestly, I adore that. The novel is a bit slow in the beginning, but the pacing gradually fastens up, leaving the reader at the edge of their seat, waiting for what will happen next. The second book in this duology, He Who Drowned the World, comes out in August, and I couldn't be any more excited. She Who Became the Sun is one novel that will leave you yearning for more and will also leave you scared for the destiny of the characters that you're reading about. I wouldn't say that this novel is perfect for fantasy beginners, especially because the characters and the vast cast of characters, as well as the alternating point of view and the slow pacing and writing style, can be confusing for some. But if you're a seasoned or even an amateur fantasy reader, She Who Became the Sun is essentially the go to novel for you, especially if you're looking for something that is based in real history. Moving on to the next book, The Cryer's War duology by Nina Vorella. Now, The Cryer's War already has an existing fandom, so if this is considered as cheating, I am really, really sorry. So, Cryer's War is set in a world where autome, akin to animatrons, robotic like creatures that were created by humans themselves, have taken over the world and have now subjugated human beings to their whims and fascination. Our main character, Ayla, yearns for revenge. She wants to hurt the man who killed her family by killing his daughter, Crier. Crier is a young woman destined to be married a rising leader of a faction of Otome who want revolution, who want the ultimate decimation of all human beings. When Ayla, to fulfill her goal, becomes the handmaiden of Crier, things start changing when the girls grow closer and form an unlikely bond between each other. But Crier's fiance is coming, and his actions are a shadow over both the girls as the world that they live in is set to change forever. Crier's War has a very well developed world and a magic system. Now, I wouldn't really call it a magic system, but rather it veers more towards science fiction than it does towards fantasy. But the workings of the autome, the inner history of the world, both are very well developed and a pleasure to read through. The plotline itself is filled with twists and turns and extremely high stakes, with areas that will make you gasp out loud and say, what will happen next? Crier's War is definitely a novel that demands more love, and I actually have another video on this which goes more in depth and is more detailed about the duology as a whole. Next up is the Burning Kingdom series by Tasha Suri. Now, this is one series where craft and the skill of the author doesn't really shine until the second novel in the series, The Lavender Sword. The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri is a novel centering around Malini and Priya, two characters who cannot be more different than each other and yet form a shaky bond between themselves. Malini has been imprisoned by her traitor brother in the Hirana. The Hirana was once a great temple worshipped by many people, but now is little more than ruins. Imprisoned there, Malini is drugged until she agrees to be burned to death in order to please the mothers who created this universe by sacrificing themselves in order to sate the demands of their ever demanding gods. Malini refuses to do so. Malini wants to control her own story. She wants to take the narrative into her own hands. And yet, betrayed by everyone around her, her resistance is slowly crumbling until she meets her maidservant Priya, who is in possession of a magic that has been long forbidden and deemed demonic by this empire. The Burning Kingdom series, which is a trilogy, is not complete yet. The second book in the series, Lavender Sword, came out last year, which I read as soon as it came out, and honestly, the actual skill and the craftsmanship of the author doesn't really shine through until we reach the second book, which is The Lavender Sword. The first book is slow and focuses more on the world building of the novel, and goodness, the world building is exquisite. The history of this book is rich, especially considering it is inspired from medieval India. The writing style of this novel truly shines through in the second novel. If you are willing to sit through a slow-paced novel with gradual development, you should try this series. But if you're looking for something fast-paced, this is not the book for you. Now, one of the problems with this novel is that the alternating point of view doesn't really hit the mark. Again, the author does improve this in the second novel, but in the first one, the alternating point of view sometimes ruins the narrative, ruins the pacing of the story. And if you're not a big fan of that, I will tell you to skip this series, but don't let it deter you from ever reading it. The Jasmine Throne is truly a novel for people who love rich world building. I'd say it is perfect for fans of the Game of Thrones series, though it is much smaller in size and with a far smaller cast of characters. But if you enjoy the Game of Thrones series, you will also absolutely devour the Burning Kingdom series by Tasha Suri. Moving on to the next series in this video, it is the Raven's Trilogy by Aparna Verma. The first book, which was previously named The Boy with Fire, is being republished, with the first book being renamed as The Phoenix King. Now, this was originally a book that was independently published, but now that it has been picked up by a major publisher, I will be expecting a lot of revamping in the series, rewriting, better pacing and better writing style. But apart from all of that, The Boy with Fire is absolute tour de force for a debut novel. Boy with Fire is set in the fantasy world of ravens, where an aging king is all set to pass the throne to his daughter Elena Ravens. But there is one problem. The coronation ceremony demands that the heir to the throne sit through a fire ceremony. So the coronation ceremony is essentially a trial by fire where the heir has to come out unburnt. But the problem is that Elena doesn't have the skills that her father had, the power to be unburnt by fire. And she has only one choice: learn before the coronation ceremony or watch her kingdom fall. Leo, her father, the aging king, is a tyrant by all accounts. He is on the process of slow moral decay, and he is a ruler who is not yet ready to give up on the throne. His greed and thirst for power shines through the entirety of the novel, and you really see the things that push him to make the albeit questionable decisions that he takes throughout this novel. A third point of view character is Yasen Knight. Yasen is a biracial man who used to be one of the best assassins that his employers have ever seen. But an unfortunate accident has left him no longer of use. Now he has only two choices: be on the run forever or allow himself to be killed by his former employers. His close friend, though, a suitor to the young princess Elena of Ravens, gives him a third option: protect Elena, the heir to the throne of Ravens, in exchange for his own security from his employers that are hunting him down. Obviously, Yasen jumps at this opportunity, but the task that has been assigned to him seems harder than it is. This is a book brimming with potential, and I believe with the new release of The Phoenix King, this book will truly embrace its potential, and I am waiting with bated breath for the next books in this series to drop. Now, so one thing that I did notice about this book is the uneven pacing. At some points it speeds up, at some points it's extremely slow. So if you're not a fan of uneven pacing, if you do not want to sit, can only be defined as a roller coaster ride, don't pick this book up. But if you think you're in for a ride filled with bumps, twists and turns, The Boy with Fire is essentially the novel with you. The writing style is lush, the prose is excellent, and the narrative voice leaves a lot of place for the reader to make their own interpretation, especially since the characters have a wild difference in their own morality, their own areas of expertise, etc. Like if you take Leo for instance, he is a tyrant king. His moral decay is eminent through the entire novel, whereas Elena, his daughter, is a budding princess whose moral views do not align with her father's, whereas Yasen is a perfect balance between the two, sitting on an area of complete moral grayness. The Raven's Trilogy is a book that I think more people deserve to read, since Aparna Verma as author has also worked extremely hard on it. It is filled with mythological references, which makes it even more interesting because it makes the world more alive than it already was. I think many fantasy books lack this history, this flavor of history that adds more depth and layers to the world building of the novel. But Aparna Verma definitely has worked wonders when it comes to world building. Moving on to the next book in this video, The Legend Born Cycle by Tracy Dion. The Legend Born Cycle is another book that is quite popular currently, but I think that no matter how much popularity it gains, it will never be enough for the creative genius that Tracy Dion is. Legend Born by Tracy Dion centers around Bree Matthews, a young grieving girl who has lost her mother and is the third woman in her family to have lost their mother at an extremely young age. To honor her mother, Bree decides to move to the college that her own mother studied at. At the young age of 16, she's going to be doing junior college, and upon entering that college, she is brought into the secret world of Legendborn. Descendants of the Knights of the Round Table and King Arthur himself, these Legendborns have been equipped with magical forces to battle the Shadowborn, or the demonic creatures that are set to bring about Armageddon, or the end of the world. And with this end of the world knocking at their door, Bree's help and her very existence might be crucial to the Legendborn for beating the Shadowborn. And Bree is engulfed in this experience not only for the motives of the Legendborn, but for her own motives, as she realized the secret society of the descendants of the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table might hold secrets to what actually killed her mother. This novel's only flaw is that the synopsis reveals more than it should. The actual synopsis of this novel actually reveals half of the plot, so if you have not read that till now, don't read it. Legendborn and its subsequent sequel, Bloodmarked, are both incredible works in fiction, especially fantasy fiction. I mean, it's Tracy Dion's debut novel as far as I know, and it is already her magnum opus because these books are the embodiment of the word masterpiece. Legendborn has a very well developed magic system, with magic being rooted in African American as well as African theology and beliefs. It is brimming with culture and history. I can rave entire paragraphs about the magic system and it will still not be enough. Especially with Bloodmarked being released, the magic system has been expanded and elaborated over more and more, which makes it a delight to read. Now, for amateur fantasy readers and beginner fantasy readers, at the beginning of this novel, the system might be a bit confusing to read, and even though it is narrated from a single point of view, the book does have a huge cast of characters and sometimes you will lose track of them. But eventually, reading this book is truly worth it because of how incredible it is. I am extremely excited for the third book in the series. I think of the Legendborn cycle as a whole. There are so many layers to this novel, so many dimensions to this novel. How well developed the magic system is, how well developed the world is, however evolving the storyline is. I have no words. It really is that good. And if you don't believe me, read it for yourself. I am always free to discuss it with you in the comment section. The last trilogy on this list, and I know it's a 9th novel, so there's another one in this video as a whole, the Poppy War trilogy by R.F. Kuang. Now this is a definition of cheating, because the Poppy War and R.F. Kuang as author is immensely famous, especially with the release of Babel. R.F. Kuang's popularity has plummeted. But that won't stop me from including the Poppy War in this video. The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang is based in a world inspired from China in the Second World War. It takes a lot of inspiration from the Sino-Japanese War as well as World War II and the colonization of China. Our main character, Fang Runin, is a young girl from the countryside who is extremely hardworking and is willing to sell her soul to get into the prestigious Sin Guard, a military academy, only as a means to escape her arranged marriage to a much older man. Now, due to her hardworking and earnest nature, Rin, or Fang Runin, her nickname is Rin, easily clears through this examination but finds herself facing even more problems as her gender and the complexion of her skin color gives more people the opportunity to single her out as an outcast and treat her as less than them. Now, one of the major reasons why I think the Poppy War is so well loved because of how deceiving the first part of this novel is. The first part of this novel reads like the common fantasy trope of boarding schools where our main character learns their true potential and their true power with the help of an eccentric master. But the second part of this novel is when it blows your mind. The second part of this novel is set after the Mughenies, a small island nation invades this fantasy equivalent of China. Rin and her classmates, who only previously learned about warfare at their academy, are now thrust into this war. Despite the fact that they are still children, they have immense burdens placed on their shoulders and they are tasked with helping their country win this war, even if it means their own death. One of the most compelling things about this entire series is its unreliable narrator. How you're essentially rooting for a person who is one of the worst people to ever exist on this planet. Fang Runin's moral decay through the entirety of this novel and how she serves for his fantasy stand-in for Mao Zedong's world building is rather lackluster. Being a military fantasy, it doesn't really focus on world building, but rather it focuses on the ethics of war and the theme of one's own interest versus the interest of the nation, as well as the common sentiment that if you embark on a journey of revenge, make sure to dig two graves. The Poppy War as a series is one of the best fantasy series written in the last decade, and it is also perfect for fans of Patrick Rothfuss and George R.R. Martin because the Poppy War as well features a wide array of characters with defining moral alignments that at some point you yourself will be confused with whom to root for and who is the right person. Combined with the unreliable narrator of this novel, The Poppy War is the book that defines the limits of fantasy. Now, I'll warn you, this book is extremely dark and it is not your average military fantasy. There are depictions of active genocide as well as other dark and gritty things. This novel really focuses on the dark side of war and how when there is a war, there will ultimately be death. There are no winners in war, rather just people who don't die. The Poppy War truly is one of the fantasy series that I think defines military fantasy as a genre, and if you are an enjoyer of this genre, read this story. That marks the end of the Standalones, Duologies and Trilogies, but doesn't mark the end of this video because the final series in this video is a quartet by Nighi Vo, The Singing Hills Cycle. Singing Hills Cycle centers around Chi, who along with their talking parrot bird friend Almost Brilliant has embarked on a journey to collect the stories of the people in their empire of An. Chi is a cleric whose main occupation at the Singing Hills Abbey, the monastery-like place they are from, is to collect stories from around the world. I have not read the entire series. I have read the first book in the series and the third book in the series. All of these books in the series are unrelated to each other and rather novellas. Each of them serve as an introduction to the world, and as far as I have read, I would recommend starting with Into the Riverlands because Into the Riverland really exposes the skill and craft of Ngi Vo as a writer, and it also has better world building than the Empress of Salt and Fortune. Though that doesn't mean that the Empress of Salt and Fortune is not an immersive reading experience. It too is a very good book, but I think if you're going to start this whole cycle, you need to start with Into the Riverlands. One of the plus point of this series is how it is not about a singular story but rather about a series of stories. It is truly the book for people who don't like reading but rather like knowing stories. You will find many similarities between yourself and Chi, who loves to hear stories from others. This book really shines light upon the craft of telling stories and how word of mouth helps to perpetuate legends and myths. This book is essentially one that not many people know about and also not many people have read, but if you're looking for a series of novellas that are quick enough to read in one sitting and yet engaging enough to stick with you for a long time, The Singing Hills Abbey or The Singing Hills Cycle is the quartet that you should be reading right now. That marks the end of this long video. If you watch till the end, you're literally one of my favorite people on this planet. Thank you for watching. I am so tired. I literally cannot speak for a moment more. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share and subscribe, and that's it. Thank you for watching again and goodbye.